seeing the basics of JavaScript and then basics of TypeScript. So in the next session, we will be like having a live developing session on the UI we designed before, right? So we will be developing that using Next.js. In this session, I am not like covering whole of JavaScript and TypeScript. Just I am covering the basics that you will be needing to develop that UI. So in free time, make sure you refer other subjects that I don't cover. So what is JavaScript? JavaScript is one of the most popular used programming languages, and it's like growing than any other programming language. So it's what can JavaScript do? So it makes the website dynamic, and it makes the website more interactable. So as I said before, without JavaScript, the page is not.
Your screen is not shared.
Yeah, I didn't share anything, Lokesh.
Okay, yeah, cool. Okay, fine.
So as I said before, without JavaScript, the web page will not be dynamic and will not be interactive. It will be a static web page. So yeah, what you can where does a JavaScript code run? So as I said in the previous sessions, so JavaScript code is run in a JavaScript engine which is inside the browser engine. So Firefox has a browser engine named SpiderMonkey, actually JavaScript engine named SpiderMonkey, and Chrome has a JavaScript engine named V8. So in the browser, so every browser has a browser engine, and every browser engine has a JavaScript engine. So in 2009, an engineer called Ryan Dahl took this open source JavaScript engine in Chrome and embedded it inside a C program node. So he called it as Node. So you may heard of Node.js, right? So with the help of Node.js, you can like run JavaScript code in Node without the help of the browser. So actually, what Node.js does is like, in a nutshell, JavaScript code can be run inside of a browser or in Node browser. So a Node provide a runtime environment for our JavaScript code. So we will not be using Node.js in this tutorial. I'm just going to use browser engine for this. So I'm going to share my screen. Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Yeah, this is the code that we did in the last session, right? The Facebook page. So the script will be in this line. So it will be in the end of the body tag. So I just included the script. So its type is type/JavaScript. The source will be, I just created a new JavaScript file which has extension .js. So you should remember this JavaScript files have an extension .js, and then closing of script tag. So excuse me. Yeah, let's go to JavaScript. So let's run this thing up. So if you right click and then click inspect, you will get a dialog box like this, DevTools, Chrome DevTool dialog box. So in this, you can see a console tab in the top. So you will be seeing the outputs here. So JavaScript kind of console log, if you want to print something out like that of actions will be seen here. So I'm going to keep this tab alive. So the first thing, let's type our first JavaScript code. .log. World. So I'm gonna save this. Let's have like the tab. So So let's refresh this and you can see the hello world is printed. So console.log is kind of a statement to print stuff in the console. So you can pass anything in here. I passed a string, so you can have a variable or an object, anything you want. So the next thing is comments. So you can create comments in JavaScript file using the // here. So if you want to have any descriptions for documentation purposes, we could use comments. So the first important thing I have to tell is variables. So like every other programming language, JavaScript has variables. Variables are nothing but a temporary storage locations. So you can store a value in a variable and give it a name. So let's see for an example. New variable. So this is a variable which has a name new var. So what it does is you can actually use this value later on in your code by referencing to that name. So it now I declared the variable new var. There is a difference between declare and initialization. I just declare. If I give a value to it, then it becomes initialization. So I have declared a variable called new var, which has value 2. So there are like three types of variables in JavaScript: var, let, and then const. So the difference between var and let is like var is kind of a global scoped variable. You can define var anywhere in the program and access it anywhere from the program. So let is like kind of block scoped. Let's say if you initialize or declare a let variable inside a block, like a function block, you cannot access that variable outside that function block. So it's kind of limited to that block, which is it is declared. So var variable is mutable. What in the sense mutable is mutable? If you can change the value of the variable in like runtime or after once you declare after the first initialization, you can change its value. So that is all called mutable. It's a technical jargon. So let is actually immutable. You can't change the value on runtime. Once it is initialized, then it's like fixed. So next, the last thing is const. So const, it's like self-explanatory. Const is used to define constants. So it doesn't, once it is defined, you can't do anything with it. You can only read its value and use it somewhere else. You cannot change it, like you cannot reassign, so anything is not allowed. That mutable kind of stuff is not allowed in const. You can use this const to declare constants in your program. So rules rules for declaring the variable name. So the first thing is you should not use the reserved keyword like var, let, const. These are all keywords which are specific to compiler. Compiler knows the statement is variable declaration only because of this keyword. So once it gets the var keyword and then it understands and perform actions based on that. So you should not use keywords as your variable name. For example, let's create a var which has name as const. You can straight away see an error. So when I go over to this, it says const is not an allowed variable declaration. So the other rule is you should not start a number with a special character or you should not start a variable name with a special character or a number. So you should not like use multiple words like this. Like let's say first name. So this is not a valid thing. So you should be using an underscore in between, or else you should be using a camel case. So what camel case is, let's say I have two words, first name. So make the first letter of the first word as small and the first letter of the second word as capital. So this is how it works. If it has another word, then make the first letter of that word capital. So this is how camel case works. This is like programmers prefer, like you use camel case like to avoid more variable name declaration confusions. It will come you handy. So as you can see, I have declared a variable of type integer. There are data types in a programming language, right? So in JavaScript, you may notice like I never said this variable it should be integer type or string type. It just took the value and just it acts according to it. So that's because JavaScript is kind of dynamic language. So programming languages can be split into two. One is static and the other one is dynamic. So for example, in static, C, C++ are dynamic static languages. So in C, you may declare a variable like this. So you are saying to the compiler that a is a variable which is of integer type and it has value 5. So the compiler, you cannot change the type of the variable throughout your program. Once it is defined and declared as int, you cannot assign a string literal to int. It will throw an error. So of course you can typecast it to some type. In that case too, you have to store that variable into another variable which has you typecasted to. So if the programming language follows these rules, then it is called a static language. So JavaScript doesn't have any these kind of rules. It has, if you assign a value to it, it just checks the value and checks its type and then takes its type and act accordingly. So it's like it will be determined at the runtime based on the values that we assign to them. So let's say in the first line I have declared a variable called newWhere, which I given a value of 2, which is an integer value. So let's console log it. Let's see what its type is. To find the type of a variable, JavaScript has an inbuilt function called typeof. So let's pass this variable. Let's see what. So you can clearly see it has type number. So let's try to assign a new value to it. New var equal to, let's see a string value. Okay, and then try to check its type. So as you can clearly see, the first time it is initialized as 2, the compiler treated it as an integer value. In the next line, we have assigned a string to it, and the compiler is treating it as a string value. So this is how JavaScript is dynamic. So you can play around with variables, like you can change it to string, boolean, or like any other data type you want. So the main issue with this is it creates ambiguity in the program. You cannot guess how the if you are dealing with the complex objects and stuff, it will create ambiguity. So the data types are like two types: primitive primitive and reference types. Primitive types are string and number and boolean. Undefined. So we have seen string. A string is nothing but a series of characters which is enclosed inside a single quote or a double quote. It's developer's preference. So the number.
Bro, you got muted.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you? Yes. Yes, data types are like two types. So primitive and reference types. The first thing is string. String is a series of characters which you will enclose inside a single quotes. A number is a number, so it will have numbers inside it. So boolean is like you're having like either true or false. You can like let's say we have a variable is true. You can give it true or false. So these two values it can hold. So the next one is undefined. So what undefined is, if you let's say we have declare a variable called a. So we didn't initialize it, we only declared it. Let's check its type. So you can see it shows undefined. So when you declare a variable and don't initialize a value to it, then these variables are comes under a category called undefined. So undefined is a type, and it's like if you forget to give a value to a variable, the compiler or the engine will automatically gives it a name tag called undefined. So the next one is null. So null is used if you want to clear any values of a variable. So let's say we have the value of new var as a string, right? A string. So let's say we want to clear that thing. We don't want anything to be in the new var. So let's give it initialize to null, and then we try to console log it. So it just clears everything inside the new var and assigns it a value null. So you can change it. So whenever you want, you can change it to null or whatever value you want. So these are all like the kind of primitive types in JavaScript. Now let's go to the reference type. Reference reference types are objects, arrays, and functions. So object in JavaScript or in any other object-oriented programming language is kind of an object in real life. So let's think of a person, right? So he has some certain properties. So his name, is ID, is address, so its phone number. These are all the properties of person. So a person is an object, kind of. So let's see an example, right? So we have an object called person. So object is defined like this. This is a syntax for object. So you have to enclose the properties of an object inside a curly brace. So we have a first property as like name, first name, to some Steve, and this phone number, it is some number. So and is, let's say, age, it is also something like that. So these are all like properties of a person. So instead of like declaring a different these number of variables like individually and getting reference to it, you can define an object and group these properties inside the object and access those variables as you want. So yeah, if you like try to find its type, it will show object. Let's check it. Oh my god. Shorthand property initialization. Okay, let's go to the next one. So the next one is arrays. So array is kind of a list. Actually, it's in simple words, array is a list. Let's initialize a new array. The values inside an array should be enclosed with the square brackets. This is an example of an array. So it can contain any number of array, any number of values inside it. There is no like C program. There is no need to initially declare how many spaces that you should occupy, a kind of stuff. So there is no need for that here. You have to you can add any number of values to it. So it is a string array. Since JavaScript is a dynamic language, you can actually add any data type to it. So what I'm trying to say is, if you are going to add a number to it, it is completely fine in JavaScript. You can even add a Boolean value to it. You can see that there is no error showing up here. If I try to console log it, so yeah, you can see it prints all the values. So in index 0, it has DDD 1, 2, and respectively. So since JavaScript is a dynamic language, you have this privilege. You can have any data type in a string which of length as you wish. So the next one is functions. Functions are the basic building blocks of a programming language. Let's say if you want to do some, you are doing some calculation inside your program, and it's like repeating in your program. Like you are keep using that code in 2 or 3 instances in your program. Then functions comes into play. You have to put that code that is repeating inside a function, and then you can call it. Like, let's say function, we are going to add some numbers of A and B, A plus B equal to, so what I did is, like, this is a function declaration. So functions start with the keyword function. This is a keyword, so make sure you don't change this. And the function name is add. You can give any function name you want, but should follow the naming rules that I mentioned before. So what are these is, like, these are the arguments which you are going to pass to the function. So the function gets these values A and B, and you can like perform any calculations below these curly braces. So I'm just declaring a variable C and then calling the function add. So I'm just passing two values, 5 and 2. So the function gets the value 5 and 2, and it just returns the value 7. It adds them and returns. So the value 7 is stored in C. This is how it works. Let's see what's in C. I can see it shows 7. So this is how a function, the return function is like not mandatory. You can like don't have a return function also. It's like a void function. So the function doesn't return anything. So if since JavaScript is a dynamic language, you don't need to define any return type or something. So you don't have that kind of stuff going on here. So yeah, since we like have a basic understanding of function, the next one, the most important thing is arrow functions. So arrow function is a compact alternative to the function that we are using now, the traditional functions. So, but it's like limited, and it can't be used in like all situations. It can be used in React in all situations, but not in normal day-to-day coding. So yeah, function. Let's convert this normal function into an arrow function. Let's see how it will look like. Return A plus B. So an arrow function of that function will look like something like this. as simple as that. I just reduced a 3-line code into a single line. So you should declare a constant variable first. Let's keep it as function name. So add is a function name here. So and you're passing two arguments a and b, and the compiler knows that it is an arrow function by this key expression. So make sure you use this arrow functions. By default they return something. So if you want like just your function has only return statement inside it, so you can just shrink it out like this. So or if you want like some other actions performed in here, so you can have a curly braces and then perform these actions inside. So in React JS, everything is inside arrow functions in functional based components. So in initial stage, React is kind of using class based components, in which like you have class and instance objects kind of stuff. So in there you can't use arrow functions, but due to like its like inefficiency, React is like totally they migrated to function based components. So everything you do there is like components which are like made of arrow functions. So yeah, the limitation of arrow function is like you can't use it like in constructor class kind of. You can't use arrow functions in class stuff. So that's its limitation. But you can use in most of the functional elements in React. So I just covered like some basics in JavaScript. Excuse me. So it is like more and more topics left over in JavaScript. You can do event handling and DOM manipulation, which I did before, and promises and so many other stuffs are in JavaScript. So if you have free time, just please try visit W3 schools and Java T Point kind of sites and check how they working and all those stuff. Now let's get into TypeScript. So TypeScript validates your JavaScript ahead of time. So what I'm trying to say is, one second. I'm using an online editor for this, so you can have an offline TypeScript editor. So the syntax for like installing TypeScript is npm -g install TypeScript. So if you are using yarn, same command, so just replace npm with yarn. So you can use TypeScript to run the TypeScript file. The command is tsc and the TypeScript file's name. So the TypeScript file has an extension .ts. So make sure you're renamed it as correctly. So a TypeScript is kind of JavaScript is basically a dynamic language, right? Let's imagine JavaScript is a static language, how it will behave. So that's what a TypeScript gives us. So it gives an experience of what if JavaScript is a static language. So as I mentioned before, due to JavaScript is too dynamic, you have some ambiguity in your code. You cannot like change the values here and there in the runtime, and it will show some error. You may not notice in smaller projects, but in bigger projects it's definitely an issue. Once you run the code, only you can find whether the code is working perfectly, all the variables are handled perfectly, all those stuff. So if any bug occurs, you should have to like go through the whole code from start and like find where the code goes wrong and what does happens there. So it's like takes your extra time, right? So to avoid that, TypeScript is created. So what TypeScript does is, so it's like allows you to interpret how it will be if JavaScript is a static language. So TypeScript behaves like a compiled language where JavaScript is the compilation target. So if the TypeScript compiled and produces output, right, the output is a JavaScript file. So TypeScript is basically a JavaScript, is superscript of JavaScript. TypeScript is a superscript, superset of JavaScript. So the output will be a JavaScript file. So what it does is it just checks the errors, and like in JavaScript you can do crazy stuff, like you can reference variables that don't even exist, and you can work with objects that you know no idea of what properties they have. Like you can do anything in JavaScript, but in TypeScript you can avoid those things in TypeScript. So these kind of bugs will be mostly avoided in compiler times. So like if you like run the using TSE command, so it asks you in which flavor you want to produce a JavaScript file. You can have the privilege to produce it in ES1 to ES6. So by default, it gives you the output of ES5, which is vanilla JavaScript flavor. So if you want to target like the old browsers kind, so then you can change it in the TS config file that you will be generating once you first time compiled the TypeScript file. So in that you will be changing it to ES1. So it will provide a ES1 JavaScript file. Can you imagine, like, you are going to use advanced and the most latest syntax available in JavaScript to generate a JavaScript file which is like ES1, which is old. So that's awesome, right? You can like code in a new advanced syntax and features, and then get a JavaScript file with error free and with runtime error free, which you can use it in the old browsers. So that's an awesome stuff. That is it's an advantage of TypeScript. So TypeScript makes your code more robust, and it's easy to spot bugs, and like variable related bugs and types related bugs. You can easily spot it, and it makes your code more predictable, readable. So more and more developers are like using React or jumping into TypeScript. It's like saving them much of a time. So if you know JavaScript, then you know TypeScript. Like you have to learn some pretty basic and simple stuff. After that, it's pretty JavaScript code only. So I can literally type in a JavaScript code here. So let's say a new variable, which is whatever. So as you can see, it works perfectly fine. I'm printing it in the right side. So as you can see, it's working perfectly fine. It's a JavaScript code. If I were to change this into a TypeScript, then we have to give it a type. So it is a variable of type integer, right? So we have to define its type. So strongly, we are explicitly telling the compiler that it is a variable which has a data type number or integer. So if let's see, what if I'm trying to change the value in the runtime like I did in JavaScript. So let's say it's a string. As you can see, it shows an error. If I hover on it, so type string is not assignable to type number. So this is it. The compiler prevents you from doing this kind of dynamic stuff that you used to do in JavaScript. So if you want to store a string value, then you have to define a variable which has a type string, and then you can store that value into it. So there are three data types in TypeScript. So the first one is number, and the second one is string. Where so its type is, sorry, I put a semicolon there. Its type is string, and the value will be string. So the next is a boolean. So as same as like in JavaScript, string and boolean. The only difference is you are like explicitly telling the browser to use this data type for this variable. You cannot change it during the runtime. So this is how it works. And there is another data type called any. So let's say we have a variable called variable anywhere. So in some situations you may have like to store a number to a string value, or you may like to store a boolean to a string value. So for that you can use like data type any. This allows you to store any type of value inside that particular data type. So I am trying to like store a number inside it. You can see it doesn't shows any error. So because it has type any, so you can store any type of variable inside it. TypeScript strictly advises to not use any in most of the time. So like using any is making the code like more dynamic, and it will more prone to errors. So try not to use this. Try to avoid any using this type any most of the times. So let's jump to arrays. So arrays, let's say we have a number array. Okay. In JavaScript, it will be looking something like this, right? Comma 2, comma 3, comma 4, comma 5. So in TypeScript, you have to give that a type number and a square braces after that. So this tells the compiler that it is a array of type number. It should only contain elements which are of type number. If I try to like enter some other data type values, it will show an error. So the type string is not assignable to the type number. So like yeah, this is same goes to if you want to create a array of a string, square brackets, and add the values you want. So this is how it works. So if you want to like add two different types of data types inside a list, let's say, so what we call it here is tuples. So in Python, tuples are different stuff, but in TypeScript it is totally different. In Python you will be using a square brackets, like rounded parentheses, but here you will be using square brackets. So I create a new tuple which is of type, which consists of type number and a string. So here I have ID1 and his name as Kevin. Okay, sorry, so yeah, you can see that I'm just using okay, I just missed a colon there. It's a string array value. Okay, so yeah, as you can see is I'm just using this tuple inside a list. So it contains a list of like uh, a list of list which contains two values. The first value as number and the second value is it is of type string. So you cannot change the order of these things. And also, so if you try to give the Kevin string value first and a number values after that, it shows an error. It wants you to give the value in the exact order that you define there. So if you don't want it to be a list of arrays and want a single tuple, you can just remove the square brackets here. It still shows an error because the order is different. So this is how tuple works. So the next important thing are unions. So let's have a scenario that we are declaring some variable called product ID. In runtime, it may have a value of string 1102, or it may have a value. There is a possibility that BID have a value of number. So in that case, you can use unions. So what union does is the BID can be of string or it can be of number. So it gives the ability to the variable that it can be of two types. So either it should be a string or it should be a number. No other than it can contain Boolean kind of stuff there. So let's see, I'm trying to change the value to a number, and it will not show an error. So if I try to change it to a Boolean, it will show an error. Type Boolean is not assignable to type, string, and number. So you can be creative in this too. Like let's say we have a variable called temperature, which has two types, hot and cold. So you can assign only these two string literals, either hot or either cold. You cannot assign other than that. So you will be using unions in like handling props in React. So it's the most important topic. If you have any doubts here, just please ask. The next one is enums. So enums are enumerated types. So they allow us to define a set of named constants. So let's say we have a enum called direction. So it has four directions, right? Up, down, left, and right. So what it does is it takes the up value and assign it to 0. Let's try to check what value does the up contains. So I have to reference it by direction dot. As you can see, it just gives autocomplete here. It gives the suggestions, right? This is like one of the most useful feature in if you are using TypeScript. It just shows what are the properties that you define for an object or an array, all this kind of stuff. You get so you don't have to refer it every now and then when you are using it. In larger projects, it will make your developing time much lesser. So let's say up and just run this. So you can see it has a value 0. So it's like goes on incremental. So if you try to log the second value, direction dot down, it shows you 1. So it goes on like 0, 1, up as 0, down as 1, left as 2, right as 3. If you want like start from some other value, say let's say 101, it just increments from this. So if I run this, you can see 101 and 102. The up as 101, the down as 102, the left as 103, and the right will be having 104. This is how enumeration works. The next thing is objects in TypeScript. So let's say we as a person object, we have an object called person who has a property, let's say ID of a value 1, 2, 3. Sorry, it should be a comma, and then he has a name of given, and then he has an age of 20. So you may ask that, is there any possibility to define these stuff, like define the type for this object? Yes, we can define a type for objects. So to do that, we should use a keyword called type. So this helps us to create custom types. So let's say we have an we have an object called person, which should be of type person. I used P capitalized to differentiate the object's variable name and the type's name. So person type, which should have an ID, which is of type number, and then it should have a property called name, and its value should be string, and it should have a property called age, and its value should be number. So I should reference this type name here. Once you referred here, like if I try to change this age to, let's say, a string value, it shows an error. So the string is not assignable to the type number. So this is how type works. You can like have any number of like values here, properties here, and define the type first, and then reference it to the object that you are going to use. So in this, like if you are handling like big JSONs, like when you are handling API calls and all, you will be getting response as bigger JSONs and objects kind of stuff. So in that case, this type referencing is like makes your developing skill more efficient. Like it gives an autocomplete suggestions. Like if you type in control and space, it shows what are all the properties that person object has. So it is like it makes your developing much easier. That's why we are using this. So there is another property of TypeScript. Like as if you noticed, if I remove this person also, this code works fine. This because the TypeScript just like takes the value and its properties. Like if you can see, it shows that person is a type of ID, name, age, which is of number, string, and number type. So it just takes it as it is. Once you define person like this, you cannot change. After that, you cannot change its value, like age to this number, or age to this string, or something like that. You cannot change like that. It is called type assertion. So yeah, the next thing is this is applied for all type declarations, like in normal variables too. It just takes the value and just sets the variable as that type of variable, and it doesn't allow you to change it. So the next thing is functions in TypeScript. So in JavaScript, you will be like writing functions like function add number comma b. Let's have this same function here. Return a plus b. So here the problem is, if I try to pass, say I'm like add 5, 2. So here the problem is I'm just passing two variables here, integer variables, number variables, 5 and 2 here. What the TypeScript compiler thinks is it takes it like any. So it treat the a and b values as any type. So you're not giving the a and b a type. That's why it takes it as any. It can be any value. So you can even pass a string here too. So if you pass a string, this will definitely become a runtime error or some kind of stuff. So in this case, this will be not a big issue, but if you are developing a project kind of stuff, this will definitely make an issue while handling data like this. So in TypeScript, we will be giving data types to arguments also. So let's say this should be a number, and this is also should be a number. So the return type of the function, you can define it in here. So that should be also a number. So what this line does is, like, I have a function called add. It has two arguments, a comma b. So the a variable is of type number, and the b variable is of type number, and the return type should be of type number. So you are giving it like making this function fully static. So if I try to pass some string values here, it will show an error. So argument type is not assignable to a number. So it's like kind of more kind of code to write here, right? So if you have multiple functions like this, let's say you want to subtract two numbers, and the code will be like number and number that should the calculations must be defined. So a minus b, you are going, obviously you're going to return a number. So it's like repeating stuff. Like, so what you can do is you can define an interface for this function. So interface is kind of similar to type. So you are defining a type to this function. So what is like interface? Let's say math function. There is no equal to symbol in interface. You should be using equal to only in type declarations, not in interface declarations. So interface of math function which has a variable called a, which is of type number, and a variable called b, which is of type number, and it returns a value which is of type number. So you can use this reference here, like just remove this stuff, remove all this, and just put the type of the function here, like math function. Okay. It's, they remove the support for it. You actually can do this in the arrow function. So let's create a function called sub. We have to return a minus b, right? So functions, yeah, we have to pass two values here. Those sub is already defined here. We have an error there. So if you remove it, the error goes. So what it does is interface makes us, like, if you are using arrow functions, you can define what type, what does arrow function arguments contains, and what its type, and what its return type. All these stuff you can create an interface and just use it in multiple arrow functions whenever you need it in the code. Just makes your code more robust and like reduces the lines of number of codes and much readable. So the next thing is generics. So generics is a tool which provides a way to create usable components, like reusable components. It creates components that with variety of data types rather than a single data type. So for example, let's say we have a function of called get array, and it has a variable, it has an argument called item, which is of type any. Let's assume of type any list. So it has a return type of any list. So we are going to return, since it is JavaScript, we are going to return a new array instance and concatenate the argument that we are going to that we are getting from the arguments. So yeah, we have num array, and we are going to initialize it by passing a value 2, 3, and 4, and 5. So we have a string array, and initialize it by calling the function and passing the value given stable. So yeah, so if I try to just push a value, if I try to push a value in num array, the value, let's say I try to push a string value here, it doesn't show an error, right? This is not a good practice. So what it becomes like, if you try to return the any type, right? Because of type assertion, the compiler takes this num array variable as like any type. So it assumes it like as any type array of type any. So we want this to be array of type number. So if you do like this, it will be like behave like this only. So here also it has a type any, list of type any. So it makes it possible to, like, if you try to push a string value or a boolean inside it allows you to push it into that number string. So we don't want that to happen. So we are going to insert generics here. Open up angular brackets and pass t. T is for like type, so it is generic here. And instead of using this, should be passing t. So since we are dealing with arrays, we have to add arrays here. So what error? String is not assignable to the parameter of type t. So sorry, you don't have to use this angular brackets in this. So yeah, we have a function which has a generic type t type. So what it does is, if I call this function getArray, I am passing a type called number. So this number is like placed here in the place of t. So wherever I mention this reference this t inside this function will just get typecasted to number. So how this function actually works is, in the first line, this will become number, and this will become a number, and this will become a number. So what it actually makes the number array to a array of numbers. As you can see clearly that number array as a type list of as a type array which consists only number. So the same case for string. If you use this method, you cannot like change values here, like change the data types of the value inside. So as you can clearly see, there is an error here. So argument of string is not assignable to the parameter type. So we should like allow us to do something like this, which we don't want to use the generics here. So basically, like, so reusable components, and it helps us to make reusable components and placeholders. So you can give whatever data types and whatever types you want inside, and you can reuse the same function to create different data types with the explicitly mentioned data type. So TypeScript is all about adding types to JavaScript. So if you remove types from TypeScript, then it becomes JavaScript file. So using TypeScript in a bigger projects helps you to like write a bug-free code. The bugs that happens during runtime, you can completely avoid it, and it gives you like all auto-complete suggestions, as you seen when I was working with the enums in directions. So it like refer the properties. You don't need to refer the properties of a object that you defined earlier in a project. So it gives you that advantage. And then yeah, in the next class we will be developing the to-do app. So we did a UI, right, for the to-do app. We will be it will be an hands-on session. You can even code with me also. So we're using Next.js and Tailwind CSS. So before, make sure you just learn some stuffs from JavaScript and TypeScript. for the application we are going to develop, these are the things I will be mostly using. So I just handpicked to myself the topics that I'm going to use in the project, and just I taught you that without knowing these stuffs and you cannot like follow me, right? So it will be difficult for you to follow me what I'm saying and what I'm using there. So I just cover these topics. So please feel free to go the typescript.lang.org/play. So this site is like an online compiler, so TypeScript compiler. So you can play with the TypeScript here. So you can change the values and learn stuff here. So you can also refer TypeScript docs. So in there they will be like giving you an options called if you TypeScript for JS programmers. They literally it's like 4 or 5 topics here. So if you are a JavaScript programmer, then TypeScript is like a day of learning. So if you spend a day or so, you can learn TypeScript easily. So yeah, if you JavaScript also have some much more concepts as I mentioned, promises. Please try to be familiar with arrow functions, because in next session's development arrow functions will be like I will be mostly using most of the time I will be using arrow functions. So promises, arrow functions, event listeners kind of stuff. Since we are using React, so event listeners, or I won't mostly use event listeners and stuff. We can actually use the states. We can achieve the same functionality by using states. So there is no need for implementing most of event listeners. So that's why I didn't cover event listeners like get element by ID, on mouse click, on click, on mouse enter, those stuffs. So these are like the important stuff here going on in JavaScript. So once you like uh, confident with JavaScript, then come to TypeScript and get familiar with these types, and just try to play with it and change the values and what it shows. So spend some time with it. In the next session, we will be developing using Nest.js and Tailwind. So yeah, if you have any doubts, please feel free to ask. Anybody?
Uh, Guys, yeah, you can come. Then we'll be able to know how far you guys are able to cope up with the workshop, or like understand what's the core of the workshop. If you have any doubts, you can ask them, or I want some suggestions or feedback on as of how it is going and how is the pace, or like I mean, does he have to put more input, or is it fine? Like we would just want to know a couple of things, no? Can someone come out and just tell us, no, so that we'll be able to know the real impact of the workshop. Come on, guys.
Okay, so actually I'm just taking it very slow. So I took one complete session for HTML and one complete session for CSS, and this complete session for JavaScript and TypeScript. So I can just like that start developing and doing that to do. But if I do that, most of you guys won't understand what is going on there. It will be like you will be like replicate what I do, and you can get the code from me also, but you don't have an understanding what is going on there. That's why I split it into 2 or 3 4 sessions, and then I am explaining what are the base thing you should know. So if you want to like explain, if you need more explanations, or if you need more JavaScript content or TypeScript content, please let me know. I may like have to take other 2 sessions and extend it like what you want, based on what you want. most probably I will be taking the next 2 sessions. So after that, Chaitanya will be taking. So if you have anything like if you want to like learn more HTML or more CSS in advanced stuff, so keyframes, animations kind of stuff, you can feel free to mention now. I can like take those in coming sessions.
All right. So I don't think you guys will be replying. Okay, cool. Then we'll wind up the session. So meet you guys next week at the same time. And sorry for the last week's postponing of the class, because since we had a lot of work, we were not able to like completely prepare for this. So sorry for the inconvenience. And from here on, we will be regular and continuous. Yeah.
Yeah, Vasigaran, I can take animations,